Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Working Mother Radio. I'm Bettina Bush, your host, and we're going to shift gears now and move into the subject of our finances because, as we said before, the year is in full swing. Kids are back in school. We are focused. We are on fire right now. This is the time of year where we're really super organized and getting everything back on track. And before the holiday rush begins, getting our finances in order is a key priority. So today we have on our show an author who has an interesting background. She calls herself a serial entrepreneur with 22 jobs and 4 businesses by the time she was 58. Her name is Peggy Burdick, and she's written a great book called It's Never About the Money, Even When It Is. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, listen, thank you for inviting me on your show.
Now, I know you've been featured in the Huffington Post, Forbes Women, MSN Living, it goes on. And you're an NYU alumni, which I know many of our listeners are. And you know a lot about this subject and you've survived your own financial issues and come out an expert on how our emotions impact our financial decisions. So let's talk about that. How do women sabotage their happiness, and what are some of the signs of that, and how is that about money?
Well, let's see. That's a 3-part question. So one of the big issues that women struggle with, regardless if they're mothers or they're single, is giving themselves permission to do X. So there's some really deeply rooted conflicts that women walk around with, and they're going to sometimes pop up in metaphors or symbols. So the classic thing that people always talk about when we talk about mothers is really their inability to set boundaries, which are critical for everybody, but especially critical when you have children. No. No means no. No is not negotiable. But when people start giving into their kids and not having boundaries and not being comfortable and understanding how that impacts their child later on down the road, they're setting their child up for failure. But that also impacts the mother themselves because they are then not in control. You have to have control when you have kids, especially because their job is to challenge you. So
yeah,
the way
absolutely.
that people sabotage themselves is by giving in to things when they should be saying no, understanding, in fact, that if the child is relentless, they don't think about the things that you think about every day. They just think about getting their needs met. But that's their job. Their job is to challenge you, and it's the mother's job especially to set the boundaries so a child can develop trust. When women have issues about money, it's about power and a lack of self-trust. So it shows up, it shows up in a whole bunch of oddball ways, but it always ties back to the core issue. And I know I'm going all over the map for you, but the core issue of self-esteem. On my website, there's a wagon wheel, and that's how I start to explain to people what goes on in the core of their life, which is the hub of the wheel. If you can have that image in your mind, if that wheel is broken, the hub is broken, that means your self-esteem is damaged. And then the spokes that come out from the center are different parts of your lives, whether it's the dog, your husband, your money, your car, your house, your kid, doesn't matter. If the self-esteem is damaged, all the spokes will wobble when the wheel moves, as opposed to having it all integrated, glued back together again, and feeling whole and strong, the wheel will move smoothly. So what's really important for women is to develop more self-awareness so they can see how they are spending their money, buying things without consciousness, getting further and further into debt, saying yes when they should be saying no, and developing just some other skills to manage. That's more than you wanted to hear, right?
No, it's a lot, and it opens up a whole lot of, a litany of other questions. Because so one of the main issues in our society today is revolving debt. People find themselves in credit card debt, deep in credit card debt, and I hear a lot of people say, that well, you need to have this and you need to have that, and there are just so many things that seem to not be necessary that are prioritized as necessary. And is this, when you talk about the self-esteem and you talk about, that this is an extension of that, is that credit card debt that people are finding themselves in? Is it because they're utilizing the material possessions to make them feel more important or more as though they're keeping up with everyone else? Is this one of those keeping up the Joneses type of situations, or is it deeper than that?
It's all over the place, and it is deeper than that, because if you talk about competitive spending, keeping up with the Joneses, it really comes from very deep insecurity and a lack of self-trust. What difference does it make? Why do you allow your neighbor, Jill, she's got a fancy Jaguar, why do you allow that to diminish how you feel about yourself? But that's, again, where the damaged self-esteem comes in. So in fact, when people have such exaggerated debt, you have to look at their mindset in terms, again, goes back to control. Is it something they need, or is it something they want? Right? And we're a society that has really been pushed into spending. We're a very consumer-oriented society. We've heard that phrase a gazillion times. It's the person that can stop and say, hold on a second, this is out of proportion. This is how I got into trouble. We overspent. We had huge credit card debt by the time we got divorced. Why? Because I was in denial. So that's a huge issue for people, regardless of their gender or whether they have kids or not, is to be honest and real with themselves as opposed to pushing everything away, because it does catch up with you.
Well, and that credit card debt is a very real issue for parents, because if you are servicing credit card debt, then what you're not doing is saving for your retirement or your kids' college. And so that can become a huge source of stress. Yeah, I have seen many marriages crumble under the stress of just that, of the finances, and it's stemming from this credit card debt that they can't seem to get out from under. And that's a huge issue for families. You know, things start to unravel. So let's shift gears here and get into the self-esteem issues. And why do so many women, do you feel, have these self-esteem issues? Because the majority of self-esteem issues, from my understanding, stem from childhood. So becoming self-aware and being able to mend those things means, you know, really having to identify what the source is of those. Is this something that requires therapy and you know, and all of that work, or is it something that you can just, rather than having to dig and unravel and all of that, can you just learn new skills to overcome it?
No. It's kind of like the conflict of the word budget or diet. They don't work. People have to heal. The damage, you are absolutely correct, comes from childhood, comes from early childhood. So some of the forces that come into play are going to be your birth order, right, gender, how much, and it's always related to how much time did your mother and father spend with you? And of that time, how much of it was intimate? Intimate in the sense that you have a deep personal connection to your child. So that when the mother allows their child to be different, and that's where everything starts to go off track. Because kids, for the most part, it's certainly true of me, I was third born, is that I had to fit in to the family. But I didn't. I'm a different person. You're a different person. The worst thing a parent can do is try to get their child to do things that don't fit who they are. The child doesn't get treated with respect. Their feelings don't get treated with respect. And for the most part, people have a hard time distinguishing between saying yes to a child, letting them have purple hair, which, you know, has a certain consequence, or getting a tattoo, which has a lot of consequences, versus having the child be different in ways that don't harm the child. You know, it's like I have a client now that her son wanted a pop gun. So now he's 7, he's moving into guns. It's like, what does she do with it? Does she play it down and get him small stuff, or does she let him have it? Or it's a real key issue, especially in these times, is to have kids understand what is that about. And the deeper issue is they're angry. That's what a lot of people never talk about, is the amount of anger that everybody has. You stand in line at Starbucks, people are angry. You're driving, people are angry. Mothers are angry. But to ignore those feelings and the behaviors that come from it, you do a disservice to your child. So to go back to, do you need therapy or do you need something that's more superficial? You can only have true change that lasts if it's deep and it's painful. That's why people don't want to do it. That's why they take antidepressants.
Exactly. You know what? We're going to come back with more on that conversation right after this. I'm Bettina Bush, your host. You're listening to Working Mother Radio. Stay with us.
Cancer is the #1 cause of death by disease for children in the U.S. today. Since the Austin Hatcher Foundation's birth in 2006, it has grown to provide unique programs to help the children and the families affected by pediatric cancer. Support begins at the time of diagnosis and continues throughout survivorship at no cost to families. Lives touched by the foundation continue to rise each day, but we need your help. Donate, volunteer, or partner with the Austin Hatcher Foundation. Learn how you can get involved. Visit hatcherfoundation.org for more information.
Welcome back to Working Mother Radio. I'm Bettina Bush, your host. And we are continuing our conversation with Peggy Burdick. She's the author of It's Never About the Money, Even When It Is. This is her third book, and she has become an expert on how our emotions impact our financial decisions through surviving her own financial issues and coming out the other side. And before the break, we were talking about how people are angry and people have deep emotions, and you know we see it all the time, daily, as we're moving through life. And the fact that substantial change requires work. There isn't a quick fix. There isn't, that these 3 tips will be able to turn it around for you. And that the reason why I asked that question was just that. I think that people like to try to put a Band-Aid on something that requires surgery sometimes when it comes to these issues of finances and how they're tied to deeper issues, and they're more of a symptom and not the actual problem. And you've touched on something really important, because much of the stress and the anger and the things that we're seeing people express are stemming from these issues. And you can try to read the latest and greatest book, or you could try to take these tips from this article. But at the end of the day, what you're saying is in your book that you really need to dig deep, and you really need to figure all of this out.
Well, figuring it out is the journey. And that's why I said before the break, is if people don't want to do it, they'd rather take a pill and disguise it. Because, and I think what it is that what people are just inherently afraid of is to identify and say out loud that I was not loved the way I needed to be. I was loved for something else, if loved at all. And you see, by this age, Bettina, you have met a ton of people that are just, their parents just drop them on their heads. A lot of people, I know you'll get a lot of mail on this one, a lot of people shouldn't even have children. Because I see these broken women coming to me for help, and it's like had their mothers treated them differently and shifted, they wouldn't be sitting, on my sofa. They would not be dealing with me at all. They wouldn't have financial problems. They wouldn't have weight issues. They wouldn't be having 2 glasses of wine every single day. They'd have different kinds of lives. They'd be happy.
Yeah. So as moms who, we're raising this next generation, and you were talking about creating this space where it's okay for our child to be different and how that impacts their self-esteem. When we live in a society, and really just as kids in general, they just want to be accepted, and and you see so many kids just trying to follow the pack and trying to be the same. How do we go about creating that space for our kids?
Well, here's a given. Everybody wants warmth, closeness, and acceptance. The baby comes out of the womb, that's what they want. My father is 99. He wants the same thing. Those 3 basic needs never change. So the best way to do it is to work out of respect. There's a big difference. You want your child to be different. It doesn't mean you say yes to everything. But if you treat your child's feelings with respect, that's a whole other ballgame. And it doesn't mean you give in to the feelings. It means that you listen and that you are present and you are patient. And you know that the most expensive thing people have is their time. And especially working mothers, they have no time. And especially if there are multiple kids in the family and a dog, they have no time for themselves. They don't have time to sit there quietly while the child is having a temper tantrum and getting the child to calm down. Right? They can't do that. So they shove an ice cream in the kid's face. Oh. Or the other day I saw someone, her 6-year-old woke up angry and were in a bad mood. So she was distracting his negative feelings by showing something to him in the distance for him to focus on. That's not respect for a child's feelings. Mm-hmm. But we live in a culture that is trying to constantly step away from the ugliness of confrontations, saying my needs are not getting met, having all sorts of feelings that, in fact, can be talked about and walked through. But the cornerstone of every relationship has got to be respect. Treating people with respect, expecting respect. That's why boundaries are so critical.
Yeah, you said a mouthful. We're going to be back with more right after this. I'm Bettina Bush, your host. You're listening to Working Mother Radio. Stay with us.
On the track, even 1/100th of a second decides who wins and who loses. That's why Bridgestone uses advanced racing technology to create their fastest street legal replacement tire yet, the new Bridgestone Potenza RE71R. Engineered with an innovative hydro-evacuation surface and unique tread compounds, the new Potenza RE71R is designed to give you maximum grip and ultimate cornering on or off the track. Bridgestone is changing the game in tire performance.
We are back with more Working Mother Radio. I'm Bettina Bush, your host, and we're talking with Peggy Burdick, author of It's Never About the Money, Even When It Is. And before the break, you had said, the cornerstone of relationships is respect, and respect for others, respect for yourself, and respect for our children. Respect in that parent-child relationship is key in building that foundation for having that self-esteem that we were getting at, which is at the core of a lot of people's financial issues. And before we continue this conversation, Peggy, I want our listeners to know where they can find you, where they can find your book, where they can find you on social media, online. What's your information?
Well, my website is thefinancialwhisperer.com. They can order the book from my website. It takes them right to Amazon, or they can go directly to Amazon. Mm-hmm. They can get it in an ebook form, and they can, I think, for Kindle, and then they can get it in a printed version. Mm-hmm. We've got a Twitter handle. I think it's Emotions and Money. I'm on Facebook. We've got a whole bunch of different platforms that we're on. But before we get into anything else, I want to, of course, offer to your listeners that I give a 30-minute free conversation. Because a lot of people have things they want to talk about. They don't know who to talk about because all these conversations have failed, or they have a lot of shame. Women have more shame than any other group, any other gender. Well, there's only one other gender, actually. So it's hard for them. It's hard for them to talk about certain issues. So I offer the 30 minutes free. They go to my site. They sign up for either the email or the book or whatever. It takes them to a sign-in page. If that fails, they can always send an email to us. It's Peggy, P-E-G-I, at thefinancialwhisperer.com. And we'll put you on the calendar, and I'll listen and give you some suggestions.
That's fantastic, because I feel as though this really is one of those issues where it's many things. It's not one size fits all. Everybody's got their own story. And yes, there are a lot of general things that we can say that can be very helpful. But at the same time, if this feels like you, if this is running deep for you, if you feel as though you really are at a stage with your finances where things have become unmanageable, or, you feel as though it's kind of dictating your happiness or your mood or your stress level. You were talking about, as moms, we need to be patient with our kids. And that's really hard to do when you're completely stressed out about the fact that you can't make ends meet. Or when when you feel like all you do is service, a revolving debt, and the balance never goes down. it's tough to be a good mom when you don't feel as though you have your whole house in order. So we really like to encourage you to use this tool as a way to try to remedy that, not just for the good of yourself, but for the good of your family, the good of your kids, because it really is something that can be worked on and can turn around. And I know that sometimes things don't feel that way, but there are resources out there, and this is one of them. Peggy, if there's anything that you want to leave our listeners with before we go.
Well, here's a tough one for sure. It's having time for yourself. And everyone talks about life-work balance and all of that, and everyone says, because a lot of mothers go, say, hey, it's a fantasy, you can't have it. But really, especially if you have daughters, mothers have got to demonstrate to their daughters, because it's a way of giving permission, that a mother's needs are as important as her child. But what happens most often is you put your child's needs first. Okay, that makes sense. But if a mother doesn't carve out personal time for herself, it goes back to boundaries, that daughter is going to grow up with certain expectations, as opposed to she witnesses her mother saying no, not being negotiable in some cases, and that's totally fine. That basically gives that daughter permission for when she's older and she's a mother to be able to say no to her child. And the second part of it is if you don't get replenished, if you don't get your batteries recharged, guess what? That stress level you just talked about gets worse.
Yeah, and in the end, it really does. It really does impact everyone in the household. Thank you so much, Peggy. This was really, really helpful. We so appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And that is it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us here at Working Mother. Don't forget to visit our website, workingmother.com, where you can find all kinds of information on everything pertinent to being a working mom today. And we have a videos link to click on that, and you can check out all the latest and greatest. We're constantly refreshing the content. So if you've been there recently and you haven't been today, there's probably something new for you. And I would love to hear from you. I'm at Bettina Bush, BettinABush on Facebook and Twitter, and on Instagram at Bettina Bush Official. And don't forget, there's no way to be a perfect mom, but there are a million ways to be a good one. We'll see you next week.
If the measure of a car was how many people it turned into people who love cars, the Subaru Outback would be worth its weight in gold, thanks largely to its symmetrical all-wheel drive. Unlike other systems that wait for a wheel to slip, it powers all four wheels all the time, all while with better fuel economy than midsize SUVs. And the fact that the Outback is made in a zero landfill plant doesn't hurt either. It's a car that is truly built to be loved. Love. It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.